My name is Kathleen Brennan, and I work with the province. And just to tell you a little bit about myself briefly, my background is in human nutrition and population health. And food security, in fact, is a topic that had spurred most of my career and academic choices over the last 10 or 15 years. I'm a registered dietitian working in the unconventional domain of intergovernmental affairs and policy. And I have stumbled into the world of climate change and adaptation quite by accident, to be perfectly honest. But since being immersed in the portfolio since around April of this year, I think that it's quite possibly the most important and certainly most meaningful piece of work that I've been involved in to date. It's a bit overwhelming to be confronted with all of the climate science that's out there, and having thought that you were somewhat aware and living environmentally consciously, and then realizing sort of the devastating truths of the world that we're in right now. And I also really appreciate the confluence of my background in food and nutrition has with climate change, where food security is a really pressing issue affecting human health in the world and the societies in which we live. I think it's fair to say that food also has a really important cultural aspect in our lives. And I'm thrilled to be here today to listen to our esteemed guests. So as we all experienced with the Cultural Heritage session, this forum, we're going to take a similar approach here. So each speaker is going to have 20 minutes or 22 depending. And I would kindly ask that everyone please save your questions to the end until we've heard from all three. At this time, I'd like to introduce my two discussants who will play a similar role as in the previous session. So I'm pleased to introduce to you Anne Wheatley. I might ask you to stand or raise your hand. She's with the Cooper Institute, which has a 30-year history of social justice and food security in this province. And my colleague, Ms. Corinne Roswell from the Chief Public Health Office. She works as a Senior Public Health Policy Advisor. And they both have extensive local experience and the knowledge on the issue of food security. So they'll be helping to animate the room and guide the discussion. We have 30 minutes for that at the end. And first up on the agenda will be Dr. Tiina Kurvits. Dr. Kurvits completed her studies at the University of Guelph and York University in Ontario. She's been working with Grid Arendal since 2002. Grid Arendal is a nonprofit collaborative center with the United Nations Environment Program. It's based in Norway, but she herself is based in Ottawa. And for those of you that don't know, Grid Arendal supports informed decision-making and awareness raising, and they have a very creative website, and I had a lot of fun looking through some of their videos and learning a bit about her and the work that they do, and I would encourage you to check their website out. Her focus with Grid includes polar issues, climate change, food security, ecosystem-based adaptation, and she has a particular interest in traditional knowledge and how it can be integrated with external knowledge to address today's environmental challenges. So I'll now turn the floor over to her for insights on the Milan Declaration on enhancing food security and climate adaptation in small island developing states. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Thanks very much for that welcome, Kathleen. Thanks also for conferring a doctorate on me. Actually, don't have. I'm not Dr. Kurvits, but that's very nice. Honorary doctorates are wonderful things too. I'd like to start by thanking Adam, Laurie, the organizers and the sponsors of this conference for inviting me. It's really wonderful to be back here on Prince Edward Island, and I realize it's just been far too long since I was last here. So now I'm gonna, okay, this one's totally different from mine. Okay. So a couple of years ago, I had the privilege of traveling to Seychelles and Maldives for a series of meetings on a climate change project that I was involved in. And as is usual, excuse me, when I'm traveling to these places, I like to check out the local food scene. I visit the local shops, the markets, I talk to producers and vendors, and just like to learn about their cultures and find some new food experiences. Well, this is what I found. I found chicken from Brazil, wheat and rice from India, sweet potatoes from the United States, apples from France, and water, if you can believe it, from Norway. Although I started thinking about that and considering we bring all the water in from Fiji to Canada, maybe that wasn't so surprising. But what I did learn was that Seychelles imports about 70% of all of its foods. And in Maldives, 100% of its sugar, wheat, and rice are imported. I learned that Braceland Island in Seychelles used to grow all of the vegetables for both itself and the mainland island of Maui, and now it can't even support itself. Of the 16 poultry farms that used to be on Seychelles, only 2 are remaining because they just can't compete with the cheaper imported chicken. And then probably most astonishingly, I found that in Maldives, the Brazilian chicken is actually cheaper than the local fish. And I want you to think about that for a moment, because Maldives has a land area of 298 square kilometers in an oceanic area of 90,000 square kilometers. And chicken is cheaper than fish, or imported chicken is cheaper than fish. So something's going on. But I don't want to leave you with the impression that there are no local products to be had whatsoever, because, as you can see up there, there is still plenty available. But it was a bit of an eye-opener, because I think we tend to imagine tropical islands where there should be lots of fresh food available, and certainly fresh fruit, vegetables, and fish. But what I saw in Seychelles and Maldives, that heavy reliance on imported foods, was telling. And it's part of a pattern that's being repeated on other small islands and indeed many other regions around the world. And the implications for local food security could be serious, or could be enormous. So I'll stop here for just a moment, just for a little food security 101, if you will. We talk a lot about it, but just to make sure that we all know what we're talking about. According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, food security exists when all people, at all times, have the physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So in other words, food security exists when you do not live in hunger or in fear of starvation. So with that definition in mind, is importing food a problem? Is it an indicator of food insecurity? Well, while importing food in and of itself is not a problem, and I think everybody who lives in Canada, we appreciate a little bit of fresh fruit and veg in January. A heavy reliance on imports to meet your local food needs does raise a number of concerns. When you rely heavily on imported foods, it leaves the country vulnerable to external pressures related to volatile global food prices. And you may recall that global food prices hit crisis levels in 2007 and 2008. And though the prices have moderated somewhat recently, the overall trend is still upwards, with prices for both crops and livestock products expected to remain above historical levels. Global food prices, of course, are affected by many different forces, including weather conditions, global food stocks, increasing oil prices, the demand for biofuels, changing food preferences, changing food demand, and speculation in financial markets. And of course, that food crisis hit right at the time of the global economic crisis. Price hikes in food can also affect nutritional security, and especially among vulnerable populations, such as the poor, very young, elderly, and women, as people switch from more expensive, nutritionally varied diets to ones higher and cheaper carbohydrates, such as rice, maize, Coca-Cola. And this shift has been contributing to a range of health problems, or rise in health problems in the small island states, including heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. And in Seychelles, I learned that cardiovascular disease is now the #1 killer. And I think I'll just stop here a moment too, because I think some of you will recognize that these are problems that we're seeing here as well. So even though I'm talking about the small island states, we're seeing this in Canada as well, and in our northern communities, Indigenous communities, and vulnerable communities in the cities. And then what about the role of climate change when it comes to imported food? Global markets, of course, help us fill gaps when we can't grow all of our, or produce all of our own foods. But then what happens when there's a crop that you depend on from somewhere else and that crop fails? So again, during that world food crisis of 2007 and 8, you might also remember that there were a number of food riots in countries around the world. And there were several factors that led to those riots, but droughts in many of the grain-producing regions of the world were definitely a significant factor. There just wasn't enough food available. And then again in 2010, after an extreme heat wave in Russia, and it was one of the most extreme summers in 130 years, and their grain crops started failing, or they weren't just producing enough, they closed down on their exports of grain because they wanted to keep everything for their domestic market. But the result was that not only did it not bring down prices domestically, it had a dramatic, or contributed to a dramatic hike on international grain prices. And then with a severe reduction in global grain reserves in 2011, the former head of the World Bank, Robert Zoellick, warned that the world was one shock away from a full-blown crisis. I think that's pretty scary stuff that should give us all pause. Because the Russian heat wave was just one example of a climate event affecting food production. But what happens as global temperatures continue to rise? Because in their 5th assessment report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, warned that we will experience more extreme weather events in the future, including more intense storm activity, more frequent and more severe flooding, and longer lasting droughts. And they identified food insecurity as one of the key risks of climate change, potentially affecting all aspects of food security, those being food availability, accessibility, use, and the stability of food systems. A changing climate means more variability and less predictability in the seasons and weather patterns that are so crucial to food production. And again, going back to the Seychelles, I was told that the climate there used to be very stable. Generally, you had light rains in the evening or early morning, heavy rains coming in December. But that's changing now, and in 2011, they experienced a 7-month drought. Something else that doesn't really fit our image of tropical islands, the idea of a drought. And of course, Seychelles didn't have any large-scale water storage on the islands at that time, because until recently, it just hadn't been necessary. And of course, the changing climate doesn't just affect food production on land. I was told that one of the reasons that fish is becoming more expensive in Maldives is because, like in so many other places, the warming ocean is causing fish stocks to move further away in seek of cooler waters. So heavy reliance on imports is clearly not a sustainable approach to long-term food security in the islands. But why has there been such a major shift away from local food production? Well, many reasons, but of course globalization has been a huge driver of that change, and we've heard globalization mentioned a couple of times already today. So traditional agricultural systems, traditional crops are being replaced in many places by less diverse cash crops and livestock production, and often with unsustainable land use practices. I hope I pushed it. Yeah, okay, sorry. And then we see similar pressures on our ocean resources from larger fishing fleets that work to service the international market. And then with these changes, there's also a loss of traditional knowledge around local food production, both on the land and the sea. There's increasing on land and sea from population growth, both from natural growth in populations in the countries, but then increasing growth from tourism. And again, the coastal zone in particular is particularly affected. And then farming and fishing themselves are often no longer viewed as attractive futures for younger people with different expectations in life than their parents and grandparents have. And I think that's something else that we see repeating in rural communities across Canada and around the world. A report on Pacific Island food security sums up the situation facing islands everywhere, and it states that the future of food security cannot be left solely to dependency on imports. If that's the case, then poverty would increase, and the ability of a nation to deliver on its sustainable development obligations would be seriously compromised. Thus, improvements to local food production are pertinent to strengthening resilience, especially in a changing climate regime. So we see that there are many challenges to local food security in SIDS, and I'll expand that to islands everywhere. But are there any opportunities that exist to overcome some of these challenges? Well, it was exactly this question that brought together leading policymakers and experts in SIDS food security and nutrition to meet last October at the Expo Milano, the theme of which was Feeding the Planet, Energy for Life. And at that meeting, they addressed the issue of food security from many angles, including the importance of promoting sustainable approaches to agriculture and fisheries, building resilience to climate change and disasters, improving rural livelihoods, interface between food security, nutrition and health, dependence on international trade and the need to ensure access to food, and the crucial role of partnerships to advance food security and nutrition. And the meeting ended with the ministers and representatives of the SIDS releasing something called the Milan Declaration on Enhancing Food Security and Climate Adaptation in Small Island Developing States. The declaration outlines the major challenges to food security in the SIDS and emphasizes the need to increase local food production, improve the management and use of natural resources, and adapt to climate change and build resilience to extreme weather and climatic events. So they really hit all the major notes, identifying the major issues and generally what needs to be done. But a short declaration like the Milan Declaration, it's only 19 paragraphs long. It doesn't get into the specifics of actually how to improve food security in the SIDS. And something like that isn't expected to do so. What it does do is raise the profile of a very serious issue at the political level by identifying the challenges for island food security and climate change and providing that broad framework for action. And indeed, the Milan meeting was seen as the first step in fulfilling a mandate given to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization to facilitate the development of an action program to address food security and nutritional challenges in the SIDS. But does this mean that we have to wait for governments and multilateral organizations to develop such a plan before we can act? I would say quite emphatically no. That's a picture from COP17 in Durban, and still there was no treaty, and it wasn't until COP21 in Paris that we got an agreement. So, you know, those international processes take a long, long time. But governments and multilateral organizations such as the FAO clearly have a huge role to play in tackling these large, multifaceted issues, the so-called wicked problems of our world. But there's already so many actions taking place in island communities that such an action plan can build on. And indeed, one of the most exciting aspects of the Milan Declaration, I think, is that it's got an emphasis on partnerships for local food production. And I can't help but noticing we've been hearing quite a bit about partnerships and collaboration today. The meeting participants there specifically, still recovering from a cold, so my apologies. The meeting participants especially highlighted the importance of engaging local communities, including small-scale producers and women, and learning from a wide range of people and institutions to find the best and most innovative solution to the problem at hand. And island communities are already taking the lead on developing local food security, because on that same trip to Seychelles and Maldives, I saw many initiatives already underway and many opportunities just waiting for the right kind of support to get them off the ground. I learned that Maldives can be self-sufficient in a number of crops, such as pumpkins, chilies, and eggplants, and that a crop such as taro could actually reduce reliance on so much imported rice. What they need is a proper assessment on what crops can be grown on which of its almost 1,200 coral islands. There's an NGO in Seychelles that's been running a campaign to promote home gardens in a bid to promote local food security. But that what they need are more extension services on things like seed saving, composting, home remedies for pests, as well as a source for small quantities of seeds for backyard gardeners. And when I shared that story in Maldives, they said that they'd also like to do a similar kind of a program, and they have similar kind of needs and capacity building. And after Ralph's talk earlier, I think they need to get in touch with the people in Vanuatu to learn how it's done. There's an interest in looking at traditional crop species and fruit production methods to see if any of those can be revived or adapted for today's condition. Both of these countries have lost a number of their native species and recognize that to conserve local resources, they first need to document what's left. But this isn't just in Seychelles and Maldives. I mean, this is in communities across SIDS and around the world. And one of the hats that I wear is co-coordinator of something called Many Strong Voices, a program that links Arctic and SIDS communities to address climate change by sharing experiences and learning from each other. And we have partners in countries around the world that, and enhancing local food security is a major issue for them. I mean, among our partners, we have people looking at planting, trying to restore mangroves to help restore their fish nurseries, as well as reduce shoreline erosion. There are farmers looking at, as I mentioned, cultivating the old crop varieties that are better suited to the changing conditions and maybe provide new economic opportunities. There are communities encouraging the production of mangrove honey and harvesting of mangrove crabs. And then there are also people that are trying to develop other agricultural products from local species, such as oil from the cocoon palm, which can be used for cooking and cosmetics and fuel, along with byproducts such as charcoal and animal feed. So the Milan Declaration sets out the political commitment that's necessary for developing long-term food security in the SIDS. But I do believe that one of the most exciting part of the declaration is the commitment to partnerships and engaging with local communities. And as the ambassador of Tuvalu to the United Nations said, SIDS communities are knowledgeable after generations of living on their islands, and they need to capitalize on this knowledge. They don't need partners or other outsiders to intervene as experts. Partnerships should instead be rooted in equality with priorities set by the SIDS. So the bottom line here is that there's a lot of knowledge in local communities. The Seychelles and Maldives, and indeed islands around the world, that governments should support, learn from, and build on. And therein, I think, lies the real opportunity for enhancing island food security. It's harnessing the energy and ingenuity of island people to reestablish robust local food cultures. And I think it would be a tremendous step that would allow islanders to take the lead in securing their lives, livelihoods, and unique cultures in a rapidly changing world. Thank you. And I'll just add, that's a different kind of an island. That's the island in my kitchen. Last Christmas Eve, and my son has just shucked a whole bunch of PEI oysters.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kurvits. And my apologies about the PhD, although it's really the fastest route to get there that I've ever encountered. Brought to you by yours truly. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful overview, and I really appreciated your underscoring of the relationships between what's being experienced by small islands and the transferability of that reality to the reality here in Canada and on Prince Edward Island as well. I'd now like to take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Stephen Underhill, truly a doctor, I promise. He's a professor of horticulture in the Faculty of Science, Health, Education and Engineering at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia. He has over 25 years of experience in subtropical and tropical post-harvest horticulture systems in developing countries based on food security, poverty alleviation, and livelihood development outcomes. Currently, his research has focused on the island of the South Pacific, working with local farmers to improve post-harvest handling. He also holds a principal research fellow at the University of Queensland, Queensland Alliance for Agriculture and Food Innovation. Dr. Underhill has extensive international experience in post-harvest horticulture research with ongoing projects in Samoa, Tonga, Vanuatu, and Fiji. And without further ado, so you can have those extra 2 minutes, I'd like you to take the mic.
Cognizant of the fact that it's 3 o'clock in the morning for me, and with that I'll launch into my talk. And just in terms of fortuitousness, Ralph talked this morning, or this afternoon I should say, about Melanesian cultures and systems. I'm going to focus on Polynesian. Ralph was talking very much about subsistence-based farming systems. I'm going to talk about commercial. So there's a bit of a yin and yang going there in terms of what we're doing. In terms of the focus of helping you to have some context of the journey I'm going to take you through, I'm going to be talking about island-based food systems. I'm going to leave atolls aside, primarily because atolls are, you can have a talk about food security issues on atolls. I'm going to be talking about land-based food systems, excluding fisheries, and as a horticulturalist, it's obvious I'm going to have some focus or leaning towards horticultural systems. I'm going to be focusing also on adverse weather events. I'm going to be talking about sea level rises or sea inundation and so forth. In terms of the outline of the talk I'm going to take you through, I'm going to give you some information about how food is produced, horticultural food is produced in the South Pacific, some of the nuances in terms of what may lead to increased susceptibility and increased resilience. I'm going to then give you a bit of context about the adverse weather effects and what they are in the Pacific. And then I've got two case examples, but I suspect with 22 minutes I'll have a chance to present one about how the two interact with food systems and the adverse weather events. So in terms of food security in the Pacific, in a bigger, broader policy position, we basically know what's going on. We know there's a transfer from subsistence-based farming, or a trend from subsistence-based farming to commercial production systems. We know that's leading to greater importation and reliance on import products. We know that products that are being consumed are not necessarily the right products to be consuming, and so that's then leading to a series of flow-on effects that have non-communicable disease, diabetes, and so forth. And so it's not surprising that 18% of the population in Tonga has type 2 diabetes. And so when you put the overlay of all the stresses, climate change is just going to make that trend even worse. If you talk to a Pacific Islander about food security, you're usually very quickly corrected and put onto the conversation of nutritional security. So for most of the time and in most places in the Pacific, it's about nutritional security rather than food security. Food security, as is traditionally defined, becomes a problem during periods of external shock, usually weather-based, when the local food supply systems rapidly break down. So traditionally, the food systems in the Pacific are highly fragile but extremely resilient. This resilience is challenged, though, when the frequency of the external events increases or becomes unpredictable, or if there's a transition from own-sourced to commercially sourced foods. So, what happens and how is food produced? Commercial food, fruit, vegetables in the Pacific. What are the trends that are underlying the food production systems in the context of food security? Well, there's declining participation in farming. If we look at the statistics for, say, Fiji, last census, there's about 60,000 people involved in agriculture. Go back to the previous consensus, there was about 90,000. That's different levels of change in different islands, but generally the trend is against away from farming participation. Yes, we have small islands, but within those small islands, the arable land that is available for commercial fruit vegetable production is limited, and that land which is available is usually subject to customary land access, which then can limit its availability for commercial production. And even if it is available for commercial production, it then becomes subject to short-term land lease availability. We have urbanisation trends occurring across, where there's a decline in access and labour, so when you put that into context, places like Fiji, it's just the ability to access labour to physically pick the product is limited, or to plant for next year's harvest. Polycultural production systems, which are the baseline of Pacific production systems, are being translated more and more into monocultural single crop based systems. There's a declining and challenging soil fertility. The tropical islands look really tropical and look really lush, but based on past agricultural practices, there is an underlying soil fertility related issue. Most of the agricultural production systems tend to be reliant on rain-fed water supplies, or there's limited groundwater supply, which makes a hypersensitivity to droughts. And while farmers have levels of accessibility to ministry services, the ministries of agriculture and so forth, the reality is these ministries, no matter how well-meaning they are limited in the amount of services and capacities, and it's a purely economics scale. So most of the times the farmers are on their own. So what does that all mean when you come into the reality of the world? What that means is most of the commercial horticultural production systems tend to be produced on floodplains or in high-risk locations. This is the Singatoka Valley in Underhill in Fiji, where the soil fertility is higher because it's a floodplain and the land is more accessible in terms of not necessarily subject to customary land access. We go to Solomon Islands, and we have a slightly different issue in terms of urbanisation and people moving onto more high-risk locations because of the land pressures. Therefore, the farming, subsistence farming locations that are occurring again tend to be on the less available, less attractive lands of the floodplains and so forth. If we go across to Alopo in Samoa, different issue again. The land access that people are growing commercial product tends to be orientated around where freehold land is. Freehold land is very, very limited in Samoa. It's very limited in most Pacific Islands. In this case, around Alisar, just outside of Apia. All of these three examples are basically what I'm trying to show is that the commercial food supply, which the population is translating to, is hyper-localised, and localised for a series of reasons, and localised in areas that tend to be more adversely affected by high-risk weather events. If we look at then now the food marketing and production system, I've already given you a bit of a touch that the food production system is highly localised. There are relatively few food transport options in terms of moving a horticultural product from where it's produced to where it's needing to be purchased and being consumed. Transport logistics that are involved often are very dependent on critical supply infrastructure. A bridge, no transfer of product. A ferry, no transfer of product. The marketing of where this product is available tends to be relatively centralised. Most of the food systems tend to be intra-island. There's very little trade and movement of food between islands. The cool chain that doesn't exist, effectively means the whole food system in Pacific Islands is based on fast to market. Pick it fast, drive it fast, get it to market, sell it fast, eat it fast. That overcomes most of the problems. Time then becomes the critical factor. So sometimes even if the food system, the production system isn't impaired, even if the road is physically impaired, if it takes longer to get to market, it has the same net effect because there is no post-harvest resilience in the chain. So we see food losses sometimes around 3 to 5%, but they rapidly become 20% if we have one single day of delay. And then just to wrap up the whole food systems, it's so much more cheaper to buy imported product than locally grown product. Not that there's any discounting occurring, it's just that the imported product is product that is of a lower quality in some cases. And in the Pacific, you see the morally bankrupt type situations where product that is illegally to be sold because of its fat content or whatever in some Western countries being sold in some of the Pacific Islands. So just a few examples to come back to some of the things I've just been talking about. The localisation of horticultural production. Samoa, Fiji. Certain crops are grown in certain locations because of the rainfall or the soil or various other factors. And so food isn't universally spread across the country. It's in highly localised places. There's a pointer here.
Same as the advancing.
This thing.
At the bottom, a little start versus something.
That area there is to be talked about. 80% of the horticultural production, vegetable production of Fiji is in that one single valley, highly susceptible to flooding. So you've got 80% of the vegetable production, domestic vegetable production of Fiji in what is probably one of the most susceptible locations. It's there for a very logical reason, because the soil's good and it's a good production process. But from a climate risk mitigation, it's the last place you want to put it. And so food, where food actually is, where food's grown, is very localised. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a conversation about the severity or the frequency of the cyclones or the weather events, but just the location. Another example, I was in Samoa a few weeks ago. Main market in Apia. If you go to the Apia markets, about 80% of the citrus that you'd see in the Apia markets are all coming from one little location at the top tip of Slady. That product has got to come down one road, it's then got to get a ferry, it's got to come across. Ferry breaks, no citrus at all on the mainland. The road is closed. This is a coastal road that follows the coast all the way along. That road's out, no citrus comes down to the markets. And so even if that particular area is spared a cyclone event, if this critical infrastructure to move the product from point of production to point of consumption is taken out, same net effect. Why I'm interested in citrus? Because in most of the times, fruit and vegetables are highly seasonal. So some fruit crops, citrus, banana, papaya, are counter-seasonal, and so they're on the market at a time when most of the fruit options are not available. And so if you start then taking out production when there is less options on the market, you can have elevated food security implications. This is Fiji. So this is the Singatorka Valley again. So most of the production systems. So they're red lines here. This is GPS tracking of most of the trucks. So we get up the valley.